Hey, I'm Alex Cherry, and I'm going to be speaking on the topic of whether or not China is going to be returning to a policy of isolationism or sticking to its current policy of openness and reform. So, in the past decade or so, and amid the past few months of the U.S.-Chinese trade war, there have been some worrisome signs that China could be returning to this policy of isolation. A couple of things contributing to this: harsh restrictions of the internet and travel bans for government personnel and restricting outside influence. This is becoming increasingly important as China is on the brink of integrating themselves fully into the global economy and also has the possibility of becoming the world's most dominant hegemon and influence globally. So like I said, it's becoming increasingly relevant amid the trade war between the United States and China. Specifically, Trump imposed restrictions on technology exports to a state-backed Chinese semiconductor maker, and just months after a proposed American ban on telecommunications company that would have caused its certain death in China. These aggressive actions from the Trump administration, part of this broader trade war, have led President Xi Jinping to call with increasing urgency for China to become self-reliant. He argues that this self-reliance is a starting point for struggle of Chinese nationalization, and has urged that China stick to this path of self-reliance amid rising unilateralism and protectionism in the world. This use of self-reliance rhetoric recalls a phrase used by Mao Zedong invoked during the economic collapse of the 1960s, but in more recent decades has been associated with North Korea and its contention that it can fend for itself. Regardless, with China's economy slowing in the past year or so, this call for self-reliance could also be to help rising nationalism. But at the same time, after 4 decades of economic development, China now has a complete set of supply chains, and its dependence on foreign trade has fallen in the past decade. In addition, they will be boasting the largest domestic economy in a few years. In this sense, China can easily rely on itself to develop without much input from the outside world. Although this theory has been proposed, I find it unlikely that China will decide to completely turn itself inward. Rather, I likely believe that they'll remain semi-open, especially with countries in the region and other countries who have experienced similar oppression from Western countries and Western influence. But the problem is bigger here. We don't want China to spiral into seclusion. That could have grave consequences for our diplomatic relations and could bring about some type of Cold War hostilities between the West and China, which we certainly don't want amid their growing power. So our call to action here is not necessarily to, back off on the trade restrictions that we've imposed, but be patient with dealing with China and not necessarily play our hand too hard. That will, force them to adopt these isolationist policies because there are too great benefits to be reaped from having them in our global economy. Thank you.